Hi, thank you so much for tuning in to Sidewalks Entertainment. I'm your host, Lori Rosales. So I'm really excited about today's show because the guest that'll be joining us today, you may know him for his book series, The School for Good and Evil. And I know many of you guys have also watched the film adaptation of his book series, The School for Good and Evil. Had Charlize Theron, Kerry Washington, Sophia Wiley's in it too. Really great film. Now, today, author Soman Chainani will be joining us to talk about his book, The Fall of the School for Good and Evil. So sit tight, don't go anywhere. You do not want to miss out. I'd like to welcome returning guest, New York Times bestselling author Soman Chainani to Sidewalks Entertainment. Hi Soman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So it's been a while since the last time we had you on our show. Apart from working on your book, Fall of the School for Good and Evil, how have you been? Have you picked up any new hobbies, traveled anywhere new, have any new experiences?
Oh yeah, I moved to St. Louis. The movie came out for School for Good and Evil last October, which the whole year was crazy leading up to that movie because it was such a large, scale event. And then I moved to St. Louis in February from New York after 22 years. So it felt like, I had a big crescendo to my fairy tale era, 10 years of writing School for Good and Evil books, released the movie, and then boom, blew up and reinvented myself. So I feel like that's where I am right now, just sort of living a different life.
Beautiful. Well, that's amazing. So, how's it been so far? I'd imagine it might be a little bit different from living in the city.
Yeah, it's totally different. I moved because I ended up falling in love with a goat farmer. It's a crazy story. It's
Oh,
like out of a Hallmark movie. I feel like at some point that someone and so that's why I ended up in St. Louis. And it's actually been quite nice because I'm working on a totally new project, has nothing to do with fairy tales, nothing to do with anything I've done before. And living in a new space has kind of shaken things up, and forced me
yeah.
to it rewires your brain in some ways. You have to start completely fresh. I mean, I moved here, I had no friends, I knew nobody, and I had to day by day kind of make my way, and still I'm making my way. I'm only here 2 months, so it's definitely an ongoing process. But I love it. I love the challenge of getting to discover new sides of yourself.
Beautiful. So, every year you visit schools all around the world to speak to kids about books and reading. Why is this something important to you, and where is the furthest that you've traveled so far?
Oh man, I've been all over the place. I think Brazil was probably the furthest of late. I go to over 40, 50 schools a year. And what I'm trying to tell kids is, it's easy to give out books. 10 years ago, all kids were reading because that was sort of one of their primary forms of entertainment. And now so many less are because of TikTok and screens and all that stuff that steal their attention. And what I tell kids is, yes, it might seem daunting to pick up a book. It might seem like more work than TikTok or something like that. But reading's the only way to develop your own imagination. Otherwise, you're giving your imagination over to everybody else who's creating content for you. So I ask them. I say, how many of you have seen the movie of The School for Good and Evil? And a ton will raise their hands. And I'll say, how many of you have read the book? And less will raise their hands. But then I'll say, how many of you who've read the book and seen the movie think the movie's better? And no one ever raises their hand. And I said, that would be the same for Harry Potter. That would be the same for everyone. The book's always better. But if you don't read books, you're getting second best. You're never getting the best version of a story, which is kind of depressing because you're going through your whole life kind of living a second tier version of imagination and you're just getting
Mhm.
recycled stuff. So I'm really in there telling kids, like, look, I write books that are meant for readers like you, that even if you're scared of a book, you can pick this up. This has been many kids' first book ever, and it's what made them fall in love with reading. So you can't be scared. You just got to sit down and start reading. And if you hate it, if you're bored and you want to get on TikTok instead, find another book. Keep looking for a book that entertains you as much as your phone does, you know. And I give them that challenge, and I just think we have to do that as parents, as adults, because um, books are the only thing that are going to save our kids' brains.
And one of the things that I love about books is that no matter how many times you read the book, your imagination always is always going to change the way you picture it, even at the tiniest little bit, every single time you read it. But if you watch a film, the film's always going to stay the same. It's never going to change. But books, it's the way you picture it is based all on your own imagination.
Well, also AI, yeah, AI is going to come for every art form, right? It's going to
Hmm.
come from movies, it's going to come from music, but it's never going to be able to come for books because it just won't. You can't. A novel can't. AI can't novel. You know.
So, have you made your way out to the Philippines yet?
Not yet. I mean, we've been trying for years to do it. It just hasn't happened yet because of scheduling and things like that. But I know the fan base for the books is crazy out there, so I would love to get out there
Yeah.
at some.
So, tell me a little bit about your book, Fall of the School for Good and Evil.
It's the last book in the series. So there's 6 books total in the series, and there's 2 prequels: Rise of the School for Good and Evil, Fall of the School for Good and Evil. And those 2 books are a little shorter. They're a little faster. They're meant for readers who, are maybe a little bit intimidated by the length of the original books. And they're about the 2 brothers who run the school. One is pure good. One is pure evil. They have that classic sibling rivalry. Only in this case, it's a murder plot because both would like the other one to be dead. And so it sort of really captures the familiar relationship between siblings where you can't live with each other, can't live without each other. You know, you love each other, you hate each other. There's a balance
Mhm.
between that is constantly in tension. And so to me, I wanted to really write a story about the relationship between siblings.
So, reflecting back on the entire book series, as the author, do you have a personal favorite character in the series and why?
Probably Sophie. I think she's become such an iconic character in the School for Good and Evil world. You know, up as her for Halloween and all of that. And I think it's just because she's so different than any other character in children's literature. She's so irreverent. She's so rule breaking. I remember my editor we were having fights for the last 10 years over the things she was doing because she would be like, you can't have a kid's book. This is not appropriate. And I'd be like, she doesn't listen. Sophie doesn't follow rules. She does what she wants. So we can argue till we're blue in the face, but she's not going to listen. And so I felt like that was always the guiding principle, was that you had this one character who was super renegade and would do whatever she wanted. And I loved writing her. I loved all those scenes. It was a blast.
So, as you mentioned earlier, your book, School of Good and Evil, does have a film adaptation of your book. Uh, I know I'm not supposed to gush about it, but I loved it. I loved the film. It was so great.
I'm so happy you like it.
And now it's complete, and it's streaming on Netflix. After you watched the film, how did you feel about it? Did it embrace the way you envisioned your characters and the story to be if they were brought to real life?
I mean, I was pretty involved in the making of it. I mean, I think the interesting thing about the School for Good and Evil is it's so open to the way you picture it, imagine it. It is based in fairy tales, and everyone has their own vision of what fairy tales are. And so I think for me, it wasn't so much about whether it matched my imagination, and it was more about, did it have the scale it needed? Did it have the feeling of it that it needed? And I felt like on those 2 things, that was what was important to me. The cast might not look like the characters in the book, things might not look the same, but was the feeling the same? And I think that's why it was so successful and why it brought so many new readers to the books, was because it had that sort of essential quality of it.
So, with the casting of the film, were you involved in that? Were you able to say, I want Kerry Washington, I want Sophia Wiley, I want Charlize Theron to be in this film?
No, so what's funny is that at that level, that's at the basic building block level of the movie. Like, is it going to get made? You need a certain level of star. So you just kind of go to the reach list, and so that comes mainly from the studio in a lot of ways, because the studio is spending what,
Ah.
150 million on a movie, and so they're like, here's the stars that could justify that kind of price tag, and there's a very short list. So when Charlize says yes, that all of a sudden gives you a movie, So it's that kind of thing. These little puzzle pieces, and you're not really thinking in terms of an ensemble yet or anything like that. You're looking for the puzzle piece to get it all started. So once Charlize, I think Charlize was the first. Once Charlize said yes, then you're off to the races because she's the top of the top.
So, will there be more film adaptations of your books in the near future?
I mean, the truth is, with the rest of School for Good and Evil, we're in a little bit of a bind of the writer strike. The kids are getting older. Things are really slowing down. So anything with sequels is a little bit in danger because of what's happening right now, But I wrote a book called Beast and Beauty that came out a couple of years ago, which is a collection of kind of dangerous fairy tales. And that's going to be a TV series that Sony 3000 is working on. I just turned in the pilot before the writer's strike. So I'm hopeful that that'll be the next thing to go.
Everyone, be sure to grab your copy of Soman Chainani's book, Fall of the School for Good and Evil. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks again.
For more full-length celebrity interviews, visit us at sidewalkstv.com, our YouTube channel, and don't forget to follow us on social media.